I used to spend quite a bit of time in my mom's office because, as a working mom back then, I would get out of school and I would go over to her office and she would run me blueprints and give me colored pencils. And I would just spend hours coloring, which I love to do. And I thought, this is a great job. I get to color all day long. And so clearly not exactly what architects do, but that was kind of my first impression of what my mom did. And I thought it would be great if I could do that. And when it was time for me to decide what I was going to do at university, I said I wanted to be an architect. And my mother actually tried to talk me out of it. She told me it's a thankless job and you'll never get any money, which thankfully, one, is not true, and two, I didn't listen to her and ended up going into architecture anyways. And I'm obviously very glad that I did.
Awesome. Well, Cecilia, thank you for taking the time. Always appreciate to get your perspective on this. And if you wanted to just jump right in, can you tell me just a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Let's see, I was born in Argentina, but my family moved to the United States when I was 7 months old. We moved to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and we were only supposed to stay for 2 years. My father was a visiting professor at Carnegie Mellon, and then we ended up just staying because Argentina at that time was a political mess. So I feel very fortunate to have the opportunity to have grown up in the United States. And my mother was an architect. She studied architecture in Argentina. And back then, at least what she told me, that her class, obviously this was quite a while ago, was about 50-50, that as a profession, architecture wasn't considered something that only men did at the time. But when we came to this country, she was the 4th woman registered architect in the city of Pittsburgh, and this was in the mid-60s.
Wow.
So she was a Latina in Pittsburgh, and there just weren't that many of them as well. So I had a pretty incredible role model. So from the get-go. I was exposed to a lot of architecture growing up.
That's awesome. And so your dad was a professor, but not of architecture?
No, he was electrical engineering.
Okay, got it.
My mother ended
engineer
up,
and architect.
Yeah, exactly. But she ended up working at the University of Pittsburgh as the head of architecture and facilities for a long time, and Pitt is right down the street from Carnegie Mellon. So
right. Were you probably had already moved over here, but the last lecture series, Randy Pausch, Carnegie Mellon, he was a professor. It was like his last lecture, he had cancer and he gave this talk at Carnegie Mellon. It was very famous. This is like 10, 15 years ago at this point, but
what would you do if you knew?
Yeah. And he that happened to him, and he was, I think he was virtual reality, but it put Carnegie Mellon on the map. That was how I first heard about it. So, but awesome. Okay. So, I mean, we already kind of touched on this because it sounds like your mom was an architect, but can you tell me a little bit about what made you want to become an architect?
So growing up, I used to spend quite a bit of time in my mom's office because, as a working mom back then, I would get out of school and I would go over to her office and she would run me blueprints and give me colored pencils. And I would just spend hours coloring, which I love to do. And I thought, this is a great job. I get to color all day long. And so clearly not exactly what architects do, but that was kind of my first impression of what my mom did. And I thought it would be great if I could do that. And when it was time for me to decide what I was going to do at university, I said I wanted to be an architect. And my mother actually tried to talk me out of it. She told me it's a thankless job and you'll never get any money, which thankfully, one, is not true, and two, I didn't listen to her and ended up going into architecture anyways. And I'm obviously very glad that I did because I love what I do.
That's awesome. So kind of to that point, what would you say is one of your favorite parts about your job?
I would say a couple things. I love that I go to work every day and I still learn something every day. And I've been doing this for about 30 years now. And so it's a long time to really get really good at what you do. But I just love that it's a different day every day, whether it's you're designing a different project, you're dealing with different clients. It's just the variety is great and that it's really challenging. And I love that. And it's also I say architecture is really a passion profession. And I think that's why architects do it as long as they do. You know, you hear about architects like Cesar Pelli, who is still going into the office at 92. And you think, you know, you could have retired a long time ago. But number one, I think it's because, again, it takes a while to really kind of hit your stride. But also, once you get really good at it, you just want to keep going, because it's you get to design things that get built, and you get to influence people's everyday lives in where they live, where they work, you know, just walking down the street by the architecture you design. So it's, I love that we have the ability to have a positive impact on people's lives through the built environment.
That's such an important theme. And I'm hearing that over and over again, which is, you know, in some industries, you can have either prodigies or younger folks that come in and just outwork everybody and kind of take over the industry in their 20s and 30s. Architecture is not like that. Design's not like that, right? I mean, this is an endeavor that is years to get to where you are. And like you're talking about, I mean, in your 50s and 60s, you're hitting your stride at that point, right? I mean, you have all of this knowledge. You've worked on so many projects at that point that you are as relevant as ever as far as, you know, keeping up with trends and things like that. So I've heard that a lot.
I mean, even working in your 20s and your 30s, you know, depending on where you're working, you still have a lot of influence on design and how things get built. And you may not know everything, but it's a great profession from the start, I think. But that's honestly, right. I'm biased.
That's okay. You're allowed to be biased, but so then it's an interesting thing. So, I mean, I hear that. And on the one hand, it's like, this is something that you can do for the rest of your life. On the other hand, do you think, are you seeing at all that people maybe get afraid of that amount of work, or afraid of not seeing that progress, or kind of leave design a little too early? Is any of that happening?
I don't think so. I mean, no, honestly, I would say as a woman, I think that at least when I was going to school, I was told by one of my male professors that, I don't know what all you women are doing in architecture. You should be in interior design. I mean, he literally came out and said that to me. There were only 7 of us in my class of about 80 people. And so obviously now it's a lot more equal, but I think at least back then it was thought that, well, women go into interior design and men do the architecture, you know?
Right, right.
But what I do like about architecture is, with an architecture degree, and this is what I tell everybody when I meet people that are like, oh, I want to do interior design. It's like, well, you should really get an architecture degree, because you can still do interior design, but you can also do architecture. You know, and I think you, as an architect with that degree, there's a lot of different things you can be doing, and a lot of different types of buildings, a lot of different, you know, if you want, you can do small residential, you can do large skyscrapers, you can do hospitals, you can, and they're all so different that you can kind of choose your career path in many different things. And for me, when you were talking about my background, I feel extremely fortunate that I chose a really good school to go to. I went to the University of Cincinnati, and at that time, it was a 6-year bachelor's of architecture. But after the first year, it was continuous for 5 years, and you switched every 3 months between school and work. It was basically a work study program, and you could work anywhere you wanted. And then they also let us work. I mean, we could go on archaeological digs and get credit for it, or we could work, you know, I worked at an interior design firm. I worked at Peter Eisenman's in New York, you know, a very theoretical office. I worked at a small firm, big firms. People went to Europe and worked. I mean, it was great that you could get a lot of exposure at a young age, because then you kind of know, okay, well, now I know what I'm getting into, number one. And number two, when we got out, we had a lot of connections, and we had at least 2.5 years of experience that, you know, a lot of times we ended up going and working for people we had already worked for. And I actually have Cincinnati interns that have started as interns, and we hired them after they graduated as well. So
that's awesome. That sounds like a great program, right? The hands-on kind of back and forth nature of it.
Yeah.
So when you're hiring for your firm, do you have a preference as to a bachelor's degree in architecture versus a master's degree? Somebody maybe who studied liberal arts or something along those lines, and then went and got their master's? Do you see any difference there? Do you look for one or the other?
Not usually. I would say I mean, obviously it depends on the position that we're hiring for, but I don't necessarily weigh people if they have a master's more than if they just have a bachelor's degree.
That's good to know.
A lot of it has to do with your experience.
Right.
At the end of the day. And,
right.
And again, you know, to me, it doesn't matter if you went to Harvard or if you went to, I don't know where.
Yeah, whatever. ABC school. Yeah, somewhere.
I don't want to diss any other
yeah.
University of Cincinnati.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that it's, you know, a lot of it has to do with your experience.
Sure. What type of experience would you like to see if you were hiring, say, a junior designer or an architectural intern, somebody kind of in an entry level type position? What experience do you like to see there?
I would like to see that they've had experience actually working with, number one, the software programs that we use. So, you know, if you're thinking about going into architecture, learning the programs that we're using right now are key, because if you come to me and you want to work, but you don't know how to do the software, you're going to spend a lot of your time just basically learning how to do the software and not really being able to just kind of jump into projects and really learn. You know, so right now we use Revit, and we're using, you know, as add-ins, we're using Enscape, but we use a lot of SketchUp, Photoshop. All those things are really good to know just coming in. So that's baseline. If you know Revit, great. You know, if you have experience using Revit in an office situation, even better, because obviously one thing is to be learning it in a class. Another one is actually using it and learning how to build things. So software now is so complicated. You're basically building the building in the model. Before, it's like we would draw 2D plans and we would draw 2D elevations. Now it's like you're literally building 3-dimensional models, and then you're kind of cutting sections through it to either look at it in elevation or in plan. You know, so there's a lot of things you can screw up if you don't know how to do it.
Right, right. It's not quite, I think, what people used to picture. It hasn't been for a while, of, you know, leaning over the drafting table and,
yeah,
you know,
exactly.
making these drawings anymore. It's
yeah.
Huh. Okay, that's great.
Where your worst nightmare was just having to erase something.
Exactly. Much different than that. But what about like kind of the hardest part, or maybe just a really hard part of your journey? Not necessarily about the job, but I mean, you've already kind of touched on the fact that, you know, being female at a time when maybe that wasn't the most accepted thing. Was that the only time you had an issue with that, or has it been kind of a fight along the way?
I would say not so much anymore. Yeah. I think it's more, it's not as overt as it used to be. But I also feel like growing up having my mother as a role model, where I remember asking her, I don't remember what the conversation was. It was something about being a female architect. And she said, it doesn't matter that I'm female. She's like, I don't want to be a good female architect. I want to be a good architect, whether I'm female or male, you know? And so for her, it was never about being a female architect.
Right.
She wasn't really trying to prove anything, you know, she just wanted to be the best architect she could be, you know? So I would say there was definitely some of that. It happened actually more in school than it did in the workplace for me, honestly.
Gotcha.
You know, working, we did quite a bit of work in the Middle East, and that was definitely an exercise in patience, dealing with male clients over there. I mean, they literally wouldn't even address me. They would talk to the male architect next to me and say, well, you should tell her. I was like, I'm sitting right here. You can address me directly. It's okay. So wow. I would say that was probably one of the hardest experiences, was working someplace where, you know, female oppression is definitely overt. Right. And also, you know, work-life balance. I have children. Luckily, they're grown now. Now that COVID is happening, if I thought I had to homeschool my children right now, I'd probably, I don't know what.
You know what? But, so I can only imagine. So I have my first child on the way right now.
Oh, you do?
And
oh my gosh, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
So great.
It's a crazy time, right?
How soon is that going to happen?
It's early next year.
Oh, good.
So
you still have a little bit of time.
We still have a little bit of time. We're prepping right now. But my mom is, she just retired over summer as a school teacher for 35 years.
Mm-hmm.
And my sister, I have a niece and nephew who are like 3 and 5, who are so entering kindergarten. And the timing was such that my mom now is, transitioned from being an elementary school teacher to being Zoom teacher and, handling her 2 grandkids, which has been so helpful. But
oh, I'm sure.
I can't imagine. I mean, I talk to clients all day long, right? And they've got their kids home and their kids in their background. And it's like, that's an accepted just kind of thing now, right? With COVID,
Yeah.
It's like, that's what we got. So,
well, I'll tell you, I have 3 women in my office. 2 of them have babies and the other one has toddlers. And all 3 of them have asked me to take time off right now because they don't have childcare. They don't feel comfortable having nannies come into the house or dropping their child at daycare. And it's not good. I mean, it's not necessarily just for the architecture profession. It's happening across the board where women are dropping out of the workforce because they have to, your family comes first and they have to take care of their family. But as a profession, there are less women in architecture. So my concern is that, they may not come back, and
right.
That's not the direction we want to be going in.
Right. So this actually happened in my family. My stepmother was she studied architecture, got a degree in architecture. And in between the time she finished her degree and was going to get licensed, I think she took time off to be with family. And it was about the time that CAD programs were becoming a thing, right? So by the way she was trained was, a classically trained architect on drafting tables. And when she was coming back in to potentially get licensed, it was CAD programs. And it was just, she pivoted. She never ended up becoming that because of, for that very reason. It's like, it was going to be starting from scratch almost. So
yeah, it is hard if you do take that time off completely, that you may get behind with the progress of the softwares and the
she's found a nice niche for herself in the design industry, so she kind of gets to live the dream. But it's a problem, and I think we're only seeing the beginning of it right now. I'm really curious to see what next year is going to look like. But since this applies to you, can you describe the process behind opening your own practice and kind of what brought that on and maybe what that looked like?
Yeah, so I married an architect. I actually had met Fred at my last internship in San Francisco. And so it's basically the reason why I moved back to San Francisco. We didn't get married until five or 6 years later, but he started the office in 1994 with another business partner. And I was working at another firm. And in 2000, the business partner left and I joined the firm in 2000. And so I've been basically working for the last 20 years and with the firm, but it had been started by my husband, but I started basically taking over kind of direction for some time. And he retired about 1.5 years ago. And that's when I took over majority ownership of the firm. And we just got a new business partner within the last year, another woman, somebody who I've known for 25 years, and she's just incredible. And so I love that I have a female business partner. We're going to be eventually 100% woman owned. And so it's very exciting. There aren't that many woman owned partnerships in San Francisco. There are quite a few sole proprietors, but not necessarily any kind of sizable woman owned partnerships that I know of.
That's true. That is absolutely true. I think I was looking at the numbers and it doesn't break down like that, but California's got the most licensed architects of any state. Kind of, we expect that. But the breakdown of men to women, and then like you're talking about sole proprietors versus 5-person, 10-person, 20-person firms, it's pretty significant. I think I saw something like 4 out of 5 architects will be a sole proprietor at least one point in their career, and maybe 3 out of 5 stay a sole proprietor, right? And it's I think whenever I hear folks talk about it, it's a calling, right? You talk about getting into it, not necessarily to make money, or your mom told you wouldn't make money at it. Most people don't get into architecture thinking this is how I'm going to get rich, right?
Right.
It is a calling, and it takes a specific type of person, and sometimes those type of people like to just be independent and do the work they like to do and not have to deal with anything else. But
yeah, and I think for women too, whatever ends up happening is, if you choose to have children, then it's a pretty good profession to be able to, take on some clients of your own, work from home, still take care of your kids whenever you need to. And so it does, when you have that type of practice, then it does give you a lot of flexibility. And right. I think what that may happen, I don't know that this is necessarily the case, but I'm kind of projecting that they start out as just kind of a one-woman firm. And then once their kids start getting bigger, then they could potentially grow their practice, get more people that will help them out, right? And then maybe they get business partners or not. But I think that may be the reason why there are quite a few women that are sole proprietors, because I think, architecture is, I'm not going to lie, it's not an easy profession. And depending on deadlines and the types of projects you're working on, you could be working late nights, and it's not necessarily conducive to, family having small children at home if you have to stay at work, until 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night. So,
right.
Now it's, if you are looking for that, there are definitely firms that strive for a good work-life balance. We are definitely that as women and as mothers, we try our hardest to make sure that everybody has a good work-life balance as best we can.
Right.
That's of what we're working with.
Yeah, exactly. With everything going on, it's crazy. But can you talk a little bit about some of the challenges of just, being an entrepreneur, being a business owner, and kind of what that looks like in the design world?
Yeah, it's interesting. Maybe they taught us this, I don't remember, but I don't ever remember taking any kind of business class in college. So they're teaching you, at least where I went, it was more about design and constructability and structures and engineering, MEP engineering. But nobody ever really taught us how to run a design firm. And at one point, when we started talking about me taking over the firm, I thought I should start taking some business classes because I don't know that I know what I'm doing here. I feel a little out of my league. But the reality is that I had been working kind of in the capacity of, CFO or COO, and because we're on the smaller side, you just kind of have to do what you have to do. So at any given moment, I'm sending out the invoices. I'm the one, doing all the business development, really the business side of architecture. So right. I would say that was probably the biggest challenge for me, especially in this transition of taking over the firm. It wasn't so much that I didn't know what I was doing. It was more having the confidence of, I do know what I'm doing, and I don't necessarily have to take a business class to tell me what I already know because I had been practicing it for so long. But, I would say if you're looking at architecture and you think someday you would want to own your own firm, then maybe taking some business classes is probably a good idea.
Right.
The learning experience from 20 years down to, a couple years. I considered getting an MBA at one point, but again, we're a fairly small firm. We're about 25 people. And a lot of these MBA programs are, teaching you how to run Clorox or some large Ford company, something like that. Not necessarily like, how do you run a small to medium-sized design practice? So,
right. Yeah, it's interesting that you say that because I do see that in the bigger firms, right? I see maybe if you were going to draw the line at like 100 architects or 100 people in a firm, they would start bringing in people with MBAs or maybe like CFOs that don't even have a design background, but have experience running large firms and all the problems that come with that. But that practical experience that you get by just being in the business of design every day, that's pretty hands-on, right? And if you're going to take 2 years off to go study at an MBA or go to night school or whatever it is, we don't want to dissuade anybody from education, but you just want to make sure it's worth it, right? Is it going to pay off in the end? Because that's a big commitment. It's a lot of money, it's a lot of time, and there is very practical experience to be had, I think, on the mid-sized and small firms. So.
Well, and I would also say, at the end of the day, architecture is a business. And a lot of people think, oh, architecture, it's about it's about the design, and it is about the design, and it's about designing amazing buildings and spaces. But it's also about, it's at the end of the day, if this is your livelihood, you need to make money. And so you have to you have to balance that, number one, because if you're not thinking about, if you're just thinking about design, you're not thinking about how long it's taking you, and then you're going to blow your fee on too much design, and then you don't have any fee left to actually do the construction documents. Or the fact that, you know, you have to be able to pitch yourself. That's another thing. Like, business development is kind of hard for a lot of architects. I think, you know, as good designers, a lot of times we may be introverts, and we may not be the ones going out there, you know, shaking the hands, going to those meetings and putting ourselves out there. And so I think business development is definitely a tricky part of architecture as well. So
that has been the biggest challenge when I ask my clients, what's the biggest challenge? You know, I do insurance, but outside of that, that's what they say is business development, right? Yeah. Either as a sole proprietor, as a mid-sized firm, or even as a larger firms, because one in COVID, you can't go see people anymore. It's very hard. But it's to your point, people are introverts, and we don't think of it as selling. We don't think of it as, you know, it's just like, look, I want to do the best design possible, and you're going to pick me, right? Like, yeah. And so that's been something I've been working with somebody on, and we're trying to set up people on the side. But that this year more than ever, and you know, we get in these expansions and contractions, and I'm seeing the contractions. I'm seeing some of the sole proprietors in the design industry start to go to work for other firms, right? There maybe that's not the right thing for them, at least at this time. And some of that comes down to the business of it, right? Some of that just comes down to, can you market yourself? Were all of your projects coming from 2 or 3 repeat clients, and then, you know, those got put on hold, that budget dried up, whatever that looks like? Or, you know, I mean, social media, we get into social media marketing. Like, are you able to do that? Some of my older clients aren't. That's not their cup of tea, right? So it's interesting that you say that. It's definitely changing a lot, and I'm seeing a lot of people have challenges with that. But, how about projects? I'm not going to ask you which one you're most proud of, but is there a project that kind of stands out in your mind that was just a really fun experience, or maybe it was something new for your firm, or something that just kind of stood out in the community, something along those lines?
I would say, if I'm thinking about our current projects, I have 2. One of them is a dog rescue that we're working on down in Los Angeles. It's called the Happy Dog Project, and it's a great client. We have multiple projects with the same client, but she basically wants to set out and reinvent the dog rescue process. You know, a lot of times you'll go to the SPCA or the, you know, San Francisco Animal Care, and these dogs and cats, they're in little cages and they're stressed out, and so it's not necessarily a great experience for anybody, you know. And so what she wants to do is rethink it across the board. It's basically cage free. You know, the dogs will have crates to sleep in, but she wants to take dogs from kill shelters, bring them in, and train them really, really well before they're adopted out. So number 1, getting a super well-trained dog. Number 2, because they're better trained, you know, they're able to, you know, be out in the facility. So we're basically setting it up. It's almost a hospitality for dogs. That's what we've been calling it, because we have these living room areas where people can come in, hang out in the living rooms, and the dogs can come in, and they can, you know, they basically get to socialize the animals, but then also fall in love with them in a more comfortable setting. And hopefully all around it'll just be a happier experience for everybody. So
awesome.
That's one of the great projects that we're working on right now.
That's cool.
And I love that it's all about just basically helping the dogs. Now, the other one that we're working on that I'm really proud of is we're doing a building in Marin City for Marin City Health and Wellness Center. So it's a nonprofit that basically does health, dental, medical services to the local community here in Marin, but also they have addiction services and mental health. And so it's serving an underserved community here in Marin. Marin is, I think, the 3rd or 4th wealthiest county in the United States. And there's a pocket of kind of low income.
Not getting, yeah.
You know, that don't have access to the healthcare that everybody should, as we live in the United States, how is it that people can't get good quality healthcare? And so they're teaching nutrition, and so it's a phenomenal organization, and they were able to buy a piece of land across the street from where they're currently. Right now, they're squished into a tiny little space in the community center. And so we've designed a building for them that's going to have a brand new, all new 1 floor of all the clinic spaces. And then above it is going to be 2 floors of 100% affordable housing, which again, in Marin is unheard of. And
right.
why they want to do the affordable housing is because, you know, they're seeing, you know, the kids that are aging out of the foster care system and don't have anywhere to go, or it's the 17-year-old pregnant girl who's been kicked out of her house and has nowhere to go. And so they want to be able to provide housing, again, to serve the community. And so we're really excited about this project. And we submitted for pre-planning approval. And so right now we're trying to get the word out so that they can raise the funds to build this building.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I'm really excited to be working on it.
As a side note, I'll follow up with you on that, because I'll see if the foundation can help in any way on that. That'd be great. Love doing stuff like that. So.
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, so just 2 more questions for you here, and I'll let you go. This was the tough one, which was, who are some leaders in architecture or design that you admire, or at least somebody that comes to mind?
Whew. Let's see. I mean, I could say the very obvious one, which is, you know, as a female architect, I love Zaha Hadid. I love her work. I love that, you know, that she just, first of all, she really got into architecture kind of late in life. She did a lot of painting and everything. I don't think she really got into architecture until I think her 60s. Is that possible? Maybe her 50s. Wow. Yeah, and what she was able to do, I love her design. And so she was a great loss when she passed away. Who else? Can I leave it at that?
Sure, absolutely. Absolutely, that's a great one.
Okay.
And then last question for you. So kind of to our target audience here, what's the best advice you could give an up and coming design professional? You know, what do you wish somebody had said to you maybe earlier in your career or kind of along the way?
I would say expose yourself to as much as you can, because as I was saying earlier, architecture is a very broad profession. And when you asked a question earlier about what do I look for when people are applying, one of the things I absolutely look for, if possible, that you have a broad range of experience, that you've potentially worked at a couple of different firms where you've done, you know, maybe you've done housing and you've done schools and you've done residential, and, you know, where I see as a profession that all of the kind of sectors are kind of merging together. Before it was, we're a healthcare firm and all we do is hospitals. And, oh. That's right. He didn't get the memo not to walk in.
No worries.
Okay, going back to the question. Mm-hmm. But I'm seeing, you know, we've got, you know, we have a lot of tech clients. They're asking that their offices feel more residential, and our residential clients are asking that their houses feel more hospitality. I was just talking about a dog rescue that they want to, you know, make it feel like a cafe to hang out, and mm-hmm. You know, and so I see that, you know, our office, we call ourselves generalists. We feel like, you know, when people say, oh, you're an architect, what do you do? Houses? And it's like, well, yeah, we do houses, but we also do, and I can just go down the list of, you know, the 20 other types of projects that we do. And I would say getting that exposure early on in your career, number one, will help you get jobs later on, but also it may take you in a direction you didn't necessarily think you were going to go. You know, you could start doing interior design and think, okay, well, I thought I wanted to do architecture, but I actually really enjoyed doing interior architecture instead, you know, and unless you're exposed to that, you just don't know, you know. So I would say definitely try to get as much exposure to different types of architecture as you can. And this is probably not the right time to suggest this, but I would also say travel as much as you can.
Right. No, that's a good one.
Yeah, I mean, just, you know, widening your perspective on not only in what you see in buildings and experience, say, you know, master plans of amazing cities, but it's also how people live, what's important to them. It really changes your perspective as a person. And I think that's really important in architecture, that you have a really diverse experience that you're bringing to the table, because it only makes your projects better. And it widens the possibility of everything.
Got it. That's great advice. Great advice. So awesome. Well, that's where we'll leave it. Cecilia, thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
This was
Absolutely appreciate it. And yeah, I'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Thanks, Zach. Bye.